Okay, so just a few quick thoughts on colour. What I find really useful is having a few what I'd call neutral colours. So something like a fossil grey. It's a warm grey with a bit of a purpley tone. That's a nice underlayer, as is something like the violet grey. It's a bit more purple in there, it's a little bit darker, but they sit nicely with other colours, these ones. The purples tend to work quite nicely with the warmer colours and the cooler ones as well. And even with the more yellowy tones, the purple is just going to balance out some of the yellow because they're opposite on the colour wheel, and you're going to get a more a browny colour, which in the case of our tree works perfect because the tree is brown. So something neutral. I'd recommend investing in one of these. I think they're really good pencils to have, and I use them across landscapes and animal portraits as well. The other one I used over here, this is a French grey. I don't actually often use the French grey, but it provided a nice sort of glaze over here as well. If I wanted to tone down everything, just dull everything down a little bit, that one worked really well. The other ones I've got something yellowy, so I've been playing around a lot lately with the gold. That's a Derwent drawing. But something like the Faber-Castell Polychromos light yellow ochre works perfectly fine as well. This one here is an olive brown 10%, I think, which is a nice one to have in, so that's a luminance one. Can't put my finger on it at the moment. Here it is. But that's more of a, as the name suggests, got a bit more of a browny green to it. Some of the green light in there. I think I used a Caran d'Ache luminance middle verdigris. That's quite nice. But the Derwent drawing have a lot of nice greens as well. That's a more of a bluey green, a little bit darker. That's a green shadow. But there's a lot in there to play around with. That one looks actually, so that's a pale cedar. That looks quite like the luminance 10% over there. What's this one? Distant green. That's closer to my middle verdigris. It's got a little bit more turquoise in it. But something, around those colour themes is really nice. With the blues, I use a light cobalt blue quite a lot. I like the chalkiness of a museum aquarelle, but that works in the luminance as well. This is the mid ultramarine and the light fast. It's not going to make much of a difference, and you can alter them as well, remember, because we're layering a lot of our colours. Here I think I've got a Payne's grey as well, so these are more of my cooler colours. So again, I like the chalky museum aquarelle. I always use them dry. They're watercolour pencils, but I use them dry. But the Payne's grey comes in all brand, most brands have those, so Polychromos one would be fine as well. Something like a mouse grey Pablo, or just the grey Pablo. The greys in the Pablos are lovely and cool. So again, I'm just ordering these sort of by these colour families then. Burnt sienna 10% is lovely. That's the luminance. And then we've got, what other colours? Something violet-y. So got a wild lavender there, light fast, or a bit more of a bluey tone there, a teal blue. What else? Luminance, just something purpley. So that's a ultramarine violet. Really nice there. What's this one? Slate violet. That's a lovely one as well. And you can see how those sort of relate over here. It's sort of coming close. You imagine that I could put a little bit of brown or layer a warm grey on top of this one and get closer to this colour here. And then sitting quite nicely there, I think that's my Mars Violet. So you can see how that sits quite nicely with that burnt sienna 10%. So those are my main colours, and I'm not too particular about which ones I use. In fact, I like experimenting with them as I go as well. If I've not used one of them in a while, I might pick something off at random. And then for the darker areas, this charcoal grey Pablo, it's really nice, but dark sepia polychromos probably be quite similar. It's just a step below black, so that's my black there, and the polychromos. Again, it's just about sort of experimenting and layering different things on. In fact, I think when I was playing around with this at the end, I took a burnt ochre, I think so the burnt ochre maybe sits over here, but it's got a little bit of yellow in it as well, so I just sort of played around with layering that on top a little bit. See the palette all together, there's a nice sort of harmony in there. And then when you start bringing in the greens for the leaves, something like a green earth or a earth green, so they're that quite dull greens, and then something quite bright like a yellow green or a spring green for where the light is catching. So on this one in particular, where the light's catching some of these leaves, I used that one underneath, and then something in between, yellowy but a bit darker, would be my moss green, again, and the Pablo. You can see how vibrant that yellow green is compared to some of the other colours. A lot of these are reduced saturation, but having that kind of pop of colour in there just brings a vibrancy to these leaves. And I think the one I used on the demo, one of my favourite, again, Museum Aquarelle, this is a chromium oxide green, which is a lovely sort of in between. It's a little bit more yellow than some of these paler desaturated greens or duller greens. It's got a little bit more yellow in, but it's obviously a lot darker than these other two. That moss green is approaching more of a olive green. This is an olive earth, light fast. So yeah, I just suggest having a play, but don't be afraid to pop in your colours. So don't be afraid to bring in some purples and blues in there. And remember, you can always knock them back. So I can always bring in a fossil grey over the top and knock that back, or even bring in something like my French grey, this one over here. Just layer that on top as well. And you can see I'm sort of making those browns as I go. The softer colours, like the luminance, are quite nice for just softening the edges off to some of those hard lines that you can put in with some of the darker and harder pencils. So the Pablo will come in and it'll be quite hard, but we can soften it and push it back a little bit by layering on some of these either softer pencils with the luminance or the chalkier pencils. So the Museum Aquarelle, that'll go on top as well, and that'll soften everything off. Just a bit sort of, yeah, chalkier. And then, as we say, we can, as long as we're using light pressure all the time, we can go back and forwards and add in detail and texture. Just have a play, as long as we're remembering the whole time about these sorts of things to do with shapes and light.